your lobbyist, Robyn Rowen, and I'm here today to provide you with a legislative wrap-up. Somewhat ironically, however, neither Congress nor the Minnesota legislature has actually wrapped up their work, so let's agree to call this a summary or an update on what MIIAB advocacy efforts have been doing for you. I'm actually here at MIIAB's world headquarters today rather than on location to make this seem more official. But I do want to point out that while it's normal for Congress to always be working or not working, depending on your perspective, it's very unusual for the Minnesota legislature to be in session in August. Of course, nothing is normal about this year. If you go to the Capitol, it was closed in March due to the pandemic. It was actually fenced off in June due to civil unrest. But nevertheless, they have been meeting every 30 days in special session because the governor is required by our Constitution to call them back every time he renews his emergency peacetime authority, which happens every 30 days. So the legislature will be back on August 13th. We have no known agenda at this time. There's unfinished business. They haven't done a bonding bill. They haven't done a tax bill. Both items are sort of like red meat during an election year. So I expect they will probably get those done. What you will likely see is what we've seen every time they've come back so far, is that they will vote on whether to continue the governor's emergency powers. The Republican-controlled Senate will vote to not continue the powers, and the House, controlled by the DFL, will not take the issue up, so the governor's powers will continue. I'm going to spend a little time on the issue of cybersecurity, and primarily because we know that issue is going to come back in 2021. And we know this because the United States Treasury has warned the insurance commissioners that if each state doesn't have a cybersecurity law on the books that applies to insurance companies and agents, Congress is going to take action. And there's nothing regulators hate more than to be preempted by Congress. So pre-COVID, one of Commissioner Kelly's priorities for this session was to pass the NAIC cybersecurity model. What this model did was impose cybersecurity protocols, as well as investigation requirements and reporting requirements on both insurance companies and agents. The problem with the model, while it was efficient to apply it to both insurance companies and agents at the same time, requirements that are perfectly reasonable for a billion-dollar multinational company are probably not reasonable when you apply them to a small agency. The department, understanding that they would not be able to pass this bill without MIIAB's support, came to us and asked what could be done to make the requirements more reasonable for agents and their agencies. And so what we did was the NAIC model originally had an exemption for small agencies with fewer than 10 employees, but that would also include independent contractors, so your lawyers or your accountants, which makes zero sense. It would only exempt a very small portion of agencies out there. So we worked with the department to craft a much more robust exemption, which would apply to firms with 25 or fewer employees, and that number does not include independent contractors. In addition, we expanded the exemption to not only apply to the cybersecurity protocols, but also to apply to the very burdensome investigation requirements. So when all is said and done, for a firm with fewer than 25 employees, the only section you would need to comply with is the reporting a cybersecurity event that happened to the agency, not to the insurance company, to Commissioner Kelly. Now, the cybersecurity bill fell by the wayside once COVID hit and the legislature went home. But as I mentioned previously, it will be back. And we will still have our work cut out for us. Commissioner Kelly is not entirely comfortable with the expansion of the exemption. And while he understands it was politically necessary to get our support and move the bill through, I expect that, especially if the legislature changes who it's controlled by, I expect him to come back and try and narrow that exemption again. So next I want to talk about paid family and medical leave. And this again is another issue that's not going to go away in the COVID era. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you don't want someone who thinks they have COVID or who's not feeling well to go to work because they can't afford to take time off. So this issue isn't going anywhere. What happened pre-COVID in the 2020 session was enacting a state-run paid family and medical leave program has been a DFL House priority for many years now. So they were looking to pass a $900 million program that would provide 24 weeks of paid medical and family leave to every employee in the state. And the revenue source for this incredibly expensive state-run program was a payroll tax. While we were, in conjunction with the business community, able to nibble at the proposal around the edges and make some small improvements, such as preventing agents from being taxed twice, once as an employer and once as an independent contractor of an insurance company. We were also able to prevent employees from being eligible for leave the first day they started a job. Regardless of those small fixes, the proposal was still incredibly problematic. The bill passed the House this year on a straight party line vote. However, the Senate, now that the NHL is back, I think this is a good analogy, the Senate played goalie once again and stopped the proposal from moving forward. The Republican-controlled Senate, recognizing that this is an important issue to Minnesota families, is looking at a voluntary program where businesses could tailor the program to fit their own needs. But the idea would be that the private insurance market would be offering those products rather than the state becoming a state-run insurance company. So again, this is another issue that we can expect to see in 2021 as well. So one issue I wanted to touch on, primarily because nothing really happened in this arena and it's very unusual, is health insurance. So with the Minnesota Care buy-in pushed to the campaign trail, legislators mostly focused on issues of drug costs as well as racial health disparities. They accomplished a few things. They passed an emergency insulin drug program for consumers who can't afford their insulin. They also passed a drug transparency bill that will require drug manufacturers to let the state know when they're going to increase drug costs by a certain percentage. But I think everyone's looking at 2021 as being the big year for healthcare reform. 2020 was also a quiet year in the personal lines area, but do not expect that to continue for 2021. First of all, Commissioner Kelly has announced that in response to the riots surrounding the killing of George Floyd, he wants to take on the possibility of systemic racism in insurance. And in particular, he wants to bring forward legislation next year that would eliminate underwriting and rating factors in insurance that might have a disparate and negative impact on communities of color. While there has been no proposals released yet, and probably they won't be for a while, we do know he's thinking about factors such as zip codes or insurance scores / credit scores. In addition to Commissioner Kelly taking this on, the NAIC has as well, and they have several working groups looking at this issue, both in terms of underwriting and rating, as well as things like accelerated underwriting and the so-called black box. So rest assured that MIIAB will be at the table when these issues are discussed going forward. Once COVID hit, everything changed. The legislature went home, we went home, and we were confronted with an entire new slate of challenges to deal with. First and foremost, as many of you know from watching my series of videos from home, we needed to make sure that agents could continue to do business and protect their clients during the pandemic. And we did this by launching an intensive effort with the governor's office and Commissioner Kelly to get agents classified as essential businesses. We also worked very closely with the Department of Commerce to make sure that agents got extensions on their renewals so they have time to get their CE completed. we succeeded in getting a waiver of the 30-day requirement to turn online classroom CE into online CE. And most recently, we were able to get the Department of Commerce to set up a temporary license for new agents who have been unable to do their testing, first due to closure of the testing centers, and now due to a tremendous backlog as everyone tries to get licensed. I think one of the most important things that came out of this collaboration with the department is they now view us as the resource on insurance issues. And they continue to come back to us on all sorts of issues, the most recent being claims handling after the civil unrest due to the killing of George Floyd. As governors issued stay-at-home orders and frontline workers began to deal with the pandemic up close, two commercial insurance issues arose upon which we needed to take action. First, we joined National in the fight to prevent Congress from retroactively providing business interruption coverage for businesses shuttered because of the pandemic. To help out, we engaged in great conversations with Minnesota's congressional delegation to help them understand what business interruption insurance was intended to cover, as well as the dire consequences of retroactively providing coverage. The result of our conversations with our congressional delegation was that they sought to find other ways to support small business in these trying times. Back in April, the early days of the pandemic, the Minnesota legislature enacted a law that created a presumption that employees that contracted COVID-19 contracted it on the job. This essentially required employers and insurance companies to pay comp claims for these employees. The pool of employees was limited to frontline workers, long-term care settings, and emergency personnel. While there was widespread support for providing this coverage, there was also equally widespread concern about what the costs of these claims could do to the workers' comp insurance market, as well as to the self-insured cities and long-term care consortiums. It was estimated, according to the Department of Commerce's own data, that claims could be high as $580 million, which would have a devastating effect on the marketplace. So we, along with our partners in the insurance industry, worked to get CARES funding to be provided in Minnesota as a backstop for insurance companies, cities, and long-term care groups that were confronted with these claims. The results of our efforts were sort of a good news, bad news situation. The bad news was that Governor Walz was not convinced that using CARES funds to back up workers' comp claims was a good use of those funds. The good news has been that the number of claims experienced due to the COVID presumption are far fewer than were anticipated, so the market isn't in danger right now. However, we're continuing to monitor the situation along with our insurance company partners, and we stand ready to take action if a problem arises. So now I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what we can expect on the horizon. And now, I don't think anyone in their right mind in this environment would try to predict what will happen 2 weeks from now, let alone 6 months. So I'm keeping this pretty high level, so you can't hold me to any of this if I'm wrong. First of all, we have a huge election coming up in November. The stakes are very high. All 201 Minnesota legislators are up for re-election. You may not know this, but Minnesota is only one of 2 states that has a mixed legislature. So we have a DFL House and a Republican-controlled Senate. The result of that is, depending on your perspective, is that the House will stop the Republican proposals, the Republicans are stopping the DFL proposals, and the only things that come out are a result of compromise. Both parties desperately want to change that result. The DFL believes they are set to win big in November because they feel like people will blame the Republicans and Trump for the response to the pandemic, Trump's statements about sensitive topics. They feel like that will carry them home. Republicans feel like this time they're in way better shape because if you don't like Trump, you can actually vote against him on the ballot, and maybe you won't hold that against their local candidates. So both parties are going to try and take control going into January. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is a redistricting year. So whichever party is in control in January gets to redraw the maps. and determine how elections will play out for the next 10 years. So as I said, the stakes are high. But whoever does win in November is going to have an incredibly tough job in January. The state currently, for our current biennium, faces a $2.4 billion deficit. If nothing changes, that deficit is expected to grow in the next biennium to $4.7 billion. Whoever is in control in January is going to have to cut budgets, possibly raise taxes. It's going to be a very difficult time. I would like to remind you, if you don't remember, but back the last time Minnesota had a deficit situation, Governor Dayton was in control, and his answer to the deficit was to raise taxes on services, so to apply a sales tax to services, and insurance services were included in that swath. So that we are going to have to be incredibly vigilant come January in protecting your interests. So now that I've scared you about what's to come in 2021, I think this is a great time to ask you to support our state PAC. Getting involved is more important than ever, and every dollar helps us have great conversations so candidates understand our businesses and our concerns. Lastly, I want to thank everyone for your support of our advocacy efforts over the past 8 months. I first joined you officially in January of 2020, and while it's only been 8 months and it actually seems more like 8 years, I've been continually impressed with your expertise and your willingness to get involved. So I ask you, given the importance of this election, please continue to be involved. Dan, April, and I are happy to help you meet your local candidates and meet your local legislators. Whatever you can do, please get out there, as this is not going to get any easier. And if you have any questions about anything I've said today, call Dan.